All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, introducing the great Max Blumenthal. He is the author of a bunch of extremely important books, including The Management of Savagery, The 51-Day War, and Goliath. And he is the editor-in-chief of The Gray Zone, the great journalistic enterprise over there, which includes such excellent journalists as Kit Clarenberg and Jeremy Lafredo and other very important journalists of our time here. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing, Max?
Good. Congratulations on the new book.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Sorry it's so long. Hope you like it. You're in it, of course.
It's like an encyclopedia on everything that led up to this disaster that we're going to be living with for the next decade in Ukraine, Russia.
Yeah.
So,
it certainly
if you're
is.
listening to this, you haven't gotten provoked, get provoked.
That's right. All right, Max. So before it's too stale, as we enter the new second Trump era here, I want to talk about this clip of your parting farewell to the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, along with Sam Husseini, the great journalist in Washington as well. Many people have heard this clip, but not everyone, and I'd like for them to. So this is you and Sam Husseini at Antony Blinken's last briefing at the State Department, the outgoing Secretary of State under the previous Biden administration.
300 reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal in May? We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing. Why did you sacrifice the rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism? Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you allow my friends' homes in Gaza to be destroyed when we had a deal in May? You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating it with fascism. You waved the white flag before Netanyahu. You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism. Your father-in-law was an Israel lobbyist. Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirked through the whole thing every day. You smirked through a genocide.
All right, now, the great Sam Husseini was accosted by security and dragged out of there. And I'll spare everyone the audio, but everyone should go and bear witness to the video and take a good look at it if you can online and see the way that he was dragged out of there. Pretty iconic. But you had some very strong words for the former secretary there. Max, what do you have to say to explain here?
Well, that was one of the few times I could actually say that something I did was for humanity, and that was the reaction I got. Like, I really felt like I heard congratulations in one form or another from representatives of humanity, including the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, who reached out to me to thank me for that. Blinken was singularly identified with the Biden administration's Gaza policy. He was one of the most responsible, culpable figures for the 15-month-long genocide that took place in Gaza. It's just confirmed by one State Department staffer after another who was on the inside the room where the sausage was made, that Blinken sided with Israel at every turn and obstructed the ceasefire that we were falsely told Biden and Kamala were working tirelessly to achieve. And when I did that, people around the world understood that this criminal figure was being held accountable in a way that he had not and might not ever be held accountable again. And they cheered it on, and I felt a certain responsibility to do that because I had access to the press briefing room because I'd been going to these briefings for 15 months. And the rest of the press corps, other than Sam Husseini, was not going to deliver the treatment that Tony Blinken deserved, let alone ask, questions that would even make him uncomfortable. And if you watch what I did, just scroll back a minute into the briefing, you'll see that Tony Blinken was talking about how the press corps were his friends and they forged these wonderful friendships, even as they had robust exchanges in the briefing room. So that's what really I was waiting for the right point to intervene, and that was the point where I just could not hold back anymore, and it happened right away. And finally, the reason that Sam Husseini and I did not respect the process as Tony Blinken demanded was because we were blacklisted by his press secretary, Matt Miller, who I called out at the end as he was escorting me out. And it was Matt Miller who signaled or ordered the police to remove Sam Husseini after he simply tried to ask a question out of turn because he was not going to be called on. So we would have respected the process if we had been called on, but they don't want to allow real dissent in that room. They want the facade of democracy with total narrative control.
Yeah. I was reminded of George W. Bush's press conference, right? His very last one before the launch of Iraq War II, where one of the reporters asked him a question out of turn and he went, "Hey, stop. This is a scripted." He didn't really finish his statement, but made it very clear that they had maybe even rehearsed it. Who's allowed to ask which question in which order and everything.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And, it's always funny to me when they're so ham-handed in their hypocrisy, right? Where, they claim to be the champions of free speech, but they're not man enough to just take some tough questions from a reporter. And they're not. You would think that they would see the mileage in acting like they're brave enough to take on all comers. But no way. They would much rather hide. They feel like they're better off not having to face these questions at all.
Yeah. I mean, the State Department has what they call the bullpen, and that's the first two rows for the press that are the legacy press mostly. Saeed Erekat being an exception because he's from a Palestinian newspaper in Jerusalem called Al-Quds. But everyone in the bullpen has to behave, and they are guaranteed to be called on. And the press secretary will work through all of them. And then if he doesn't want to call anyone who's outside the bullpen, then he'll just keep working back to them. And he uses them to box us out. And Blinken was doing the same thing. You watch the White House press briefings. They get all the questions in advance. Biden is told who to call on in advance. And it's a complete Potemkin village theater that is designed to. There have been briefings where Biden got some unlikely questions from conservative reporters, but none of them were going to ask what I was asking Blinken. And the substantive issues with Blinken are just completely off limits to the press in Washington, and they do concern his family, his commitment to Zionism as a Jew. You're just not allowed to talk about that, and how that compromised him. And that was at the heart of my questioning. And my questioning also came from my experience as a Jew growing up in Washington and rejecting Zionism, and seeing how a figure like Tony Blinken so closely identified Judaism with the Holocaust that, in my view, Israel committed, and did so much damage to us and everything that I was taught to believe in, and exposed the hypocrisy before the world. So this was personal for me. It transcended journalism or even activism. And it had to be done for me also to get closure on the last 15 months where I think I played a role in exposing a lot of the lies and deceptions that Tony Blinken deployed in order to obstruct a ceasefire when one was actually on the table, a deal was on the table in October 2023.
And that's something that you said to Blinken in your confrontation there, that we had a
Yeah.
deal in May and everybody knows that. But now you're saying, no, we had ceasefires on the table even in October 23. Can you please take us through the history of that? Because as you said, the official story coming out of the White House was they were working tirelessly to achieve this ceasefire that somehow they were just unable to achieve, I guess, because of the intransigence of the terrorists on the other side, right?
Yeah. On October 12th, Sam Husseini and I actually confronted the press secretary for the first time about the atrocities Israel was committing just 5 days in the Gaza Strip, and the calls by Israeli leadership for genocide, just straight up genocidal intent being expressed at the highest level. Netanyahu referring to Palestinians as Amalek, his ally in the Knesset, calling for Nakba 2.0, and so on. And Matt Miller just chewed us out. But it was clear to me, and also from my understanding of previous agreements with Hamas, between Hamas and Israel, that Hamas had constructed the operation of October 7th in order to get as much human collateral as possible, because they were prevented from having any diplomatic leverage otherwise, in order to get Palestinian prisoners and hostages, including like child prisoners and women prisoners, out of prison, but also to relax the siege and to begin to consolidate themselves, because, unlike the rebranded Al Qaeda forces that have overtaken Syria, the West refused to recognize them. So they did not carry out the acts of there were atrocities on October 7th, but I understood they weren't beheading babies. There was no mass rape and instructions to sexually assault women. And that's all been discredited by now. But Blinken, his State Department, the media was conveying these to prevent a deal from taking place and give Israel latitude to destroy large swaths of the Gaza Strip. Hamas actually told the Israelis that we will release a large number of hostages if you simply do not do a ground invasion. They told them that in October. They wanted to take it from there. That was obviously off the table. Blinken on October 31st in the Senate rejected calls for a ceasefire, said Israel needs to, in so many words, be able to destroy more, because they're dealing not just with terrorists, but with people who have mutilated entire families and then had lunch in their dining room, which was a complete hoax that was soon exposed as such. Then we saw various ceasefire resolutions at the United Nations vetoed by the United States. We saw the U.S. rearm Israel after the brief humanitarian pause that allowed an exchange of captives, which showed that Hamas was operating in good faith and had been taking good care of the hostages in order to get as many of their people back. The U.S. sent a massive shipment of over $20 billion and justified it on the basis of Israel needing to also go to war with Hezbollah. And in May, the International Court of Justice introduced its ruling calling not just for Israel to cease genocide, but to also not invade Rafah, which is where most displaced Palestinians had been living in tents. And that's when the Biden administration introduced its ceasefire proposal, and that resulted in the Algerian resolution at the UN being tabled. That resolution was to enforce the ICJ decision, and at the same time, Hamas accepted the U.S. ceasefire proposal, which was clearly introduced to everyone to subvert international law in the ICJ decision. But Hamas accepted it, and that's why I said we had a deal on the table. But it was Netanyahu, with his fanatical religious nationalist and messianist security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and finance minister Bezalel Smotrich and other fanatics who kept introducing new conditions that prevented that deal from taking place. Around this time, they assassinated in his office in Beirut the chief Palestinian negotiator outside of Gaza, Salah Arori. Then they attacked the Iranian consulate in Syria, and they began provoking Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah into what they wanted, into the regional war that Netanyahu wanted. And as that developed, the U.S. continued vetoing UN resolutions until by September, the Israeli military was able to escalate in Lebanon after a very suspect bombing in the occupied Syrian town of Majd al-Shams, which Israel occupies, in which 12 Syrian youth were killed. Local Druze officials said that they didn't believe that Hezbollah was responsible. Israel blamed Hezbollah, and that's when it began attacking Beirut directly. It eventually killed Hassan Nasrallah. It was killing IRGC officials. It killed the head of the Jihad Council, the military council of Hezbollah, Fuad Shukr. And the Biden administration loved this. They loved what they were seeing because they have wanted to oust Hezbollah from just completely. They wanted to waste Hezbollah and remove the president, the interim president of Lebanon, and replace them with a more complicit figure. They also wanted to remove the government in Syria, and an operation was brewing there from forces that the West and NATO through Turkey were quietly backing in HTS. And they also had restarted a war in Yemen, and they wanted to destroy the Houthi leadership, which was waging a fairly effective blockade in the Red Sea. So for all these reasons, the U.S. was obstructing a ceasefire while telling their Democratic base, because Kamala had taken the baton from Biden and was running for president, that she was working tirelessly for a ceasefire. But if you actually even just read public media reports in places like Politico, it was clear that the people who were running Biden's policy, Blinken, Brett McGurk at the NSC, Jake Sullivan, and their Lebanon envoy, Amos Hochstein, who was actually an dual American-Israeli citizen, were delighted with the destruction that Israel was wreaking all across the region, and actually pleasantly surprised. They loved the pager attack in Lebanon. And so they were postponing the ceasefire that was already there. And that meant that they were sacrificing tens of thousands of lives in the Gaza Strip to be able to reshape the region according to Netanyahu's designs. Finally, they killed Yahya Sinwar. Israel killed Yahya Sinwar, sort of by accident. They found him fighting in the field alongside his men, unlike Netanyahu, who was hiding in a luxury bunker during that time because Hezbollah had actually scored a direct hit with a drone on his home in Caesarea. Sinwar was killed, and at that point, the Biden administration decided, well, we've achieved so many goals here. Like Israel has decapitated the leadership of all these organizations. We might as well do a deal. But as Blinken himself admitted in his own press conference, and he had also said this at the Atlantic Council where he was interrupted twice, and I said this at the time, killing Sinwar makes a deal very difficult because everything has to go through him. He has to approve it, and he was no longer alive. So it took them months more to actually get everyone on board. And the Israelis, of course, were obstructing. Netanyahu had to reconstruct his coalition. And so it took so long between that time and the election took place. They lost because of their Gaza policy and alienated so much of their base. They lost Michigan. And by the time they finally could get a ceasefire together because of all the destruction and killing and assassination they were doing, Donald Trump was there to get the credit, and Netanyahu was more than happy to give him the credit because Netanyahu likes Trump better. They share a donor in Miriam Adelson. And Trump was going to give Netanyahu the West Bank, where Israel is currently besieging the city of Jenin, as sort of an exchange or a trade-off for the Gaza ceasefire. so that's the way I saw it working out. So the real reason that it took so long to get a ceasefire when it was always there, and when Hamas was willing to accept such a what would be like a lousy deal after their operation and all they suffered, is because of the cynical geopolitical gambit that the Biden administration was waging, with Netanyahu ushering in what Condoleezza Rice called back in 2006 the birth pangs of a new Middle East.
Yeah.
Their goal, by the way, was to get back to the Abraham Accords, which is what prompted October 7th in the first place, to get back to the plan for integrating regional integration between the Sunni retrograde monarchist Gulf states and Israel, going over the heads of the Palestinians.
Hang on just 1 second for me here. You guys, I'm so proud to announce the publication of the Libertarian Institute's 14th book. It's Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War, Undue Influence, Deceptions, and the Neocon Energy Agenda by Gary Vogler, former senior oil consultant and deputy senior oil advisor for U.S. forces during Iraq War II. Remember how I wrote in Enough Already about how Ahmed Chalabi sold the neoconservatives on a plan to rebuild the old British oil pipeline from Mosul and Kirkuk, Iraq to Haifa, Israel, if they would only get the United States to overthrow Saddam Hussein for him? And how they bought it because they are as dumb as they are corrupt? Well, Gary was there. As senior civilian consultant to the DoD and Iraqi oil ministry, he had a unique window and experience witnessing the Pentagon neocons and their machinations on behalf of Israel before and during that war. And it turns out that even though they did not get their pipeline, as Vogler demonstrates, the neocons and their Likudnik bosses figured out an effective plan B anyway. You are going to love Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War by Gary Vogler, available everywhere. Check it out along with our other great books at libertarianinstitute.org/books. Hey, y'all, let me tell you about Robertson Roberts Brokerage, Inc. Nobody trusts the U.S. dollar anymore. Foreign governments are stocking up on gold instead of $100 bills. One, they know they need to, and two, that means you need to too. Interest rates are up, but for some reason, not much for savings accounts. Park your money there and watch Uncle Joe Biden just counterfeit its value away. You can see how the Fed is afraid to raise rates to beat inflation for fear of popping the current bubbles, at least before the election. So more inflation it will continue to be. Gold is your shield against monetary and price inflation, just like it always has been. Now, Tim Fry and the guys over at Robertson Roberts are recommending gold over silver since the world's almost 200 governments are putting their own pressure on the price, which should help everyone else who makes similar calls on their own. Of course, Robertson Roberts can help you with platinum, palladium, and silver, as well as gold. Don't let the Fed and the war party inflate all your savings away. Look up Robertson Roberts at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. All right, now, we're somewhat short on time, but I want to get back to what you said there about the trade-off about the renewed action in the West Bank as there's a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. It's been, popular hearsay going around and including in Israeli newspapers and so forth that Miriam Adelson had, the widow of Sheldon Adelson, had a direct quid pro quo. Here's $100 million. I want you to allow the Israeli government to officially annex the West Bank, as though they hadn't annexed it back in 1967 anyway. Yeah. But to go ahead and recognize that. And then I guess the question is whether to do so, whether how far they are willing to go, as compared to on a scale of 1 to what just happened in Gaza, in order to take even more of that territory, possibly even including emptying the cities and trying to force the Palestinian people into Jordan, or what?
Well, there's the West Bank is divided, but this is all the result of Oslo, by the way. I mean, Oslo made this all possible. The fake peace process. It divided the West Bank into areas A, B, and C. Area A are the populated cities that are mostly controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Area B is mixed control between the Israeli military and Palestinian Authority. and Area C is Israeli military control. And those are the more rural areas, the farming areas, the areas where they want the water and where the more fanatical settlements are. And what the goal of the Israeli military is here is to push everyone into Area A, the most Palestinian population possible on the least possible land, and then take all of the arable land, all of the land where there are water wells, which they've already basically taken in the Jordan Valley, and all the areas that are religiously significant, which is particularly around Hebron and the South Hebron Hills, where there are the most fanatical settlers, and then north of Nablus, and just take them. That's what they've been doing since October 7th through sheer terrorism. They gave the settlers uniforms. They gave them M4 Colt rifles from the U.S. and basically said, you are deputized to go out and just shoot Palestinians, terrorize them as much as possible. And now Donald Trump has pardoned some of the most violent settlers. I wouldn't say pardoned, but stepping back, the Biden administration sanctioned a small handful of extremely violent settlers who were known for killing, price tag attacks, burning homes, as a token gesture to international law, and in place of actually sanctioning the entire Israeli military, which was carrying out state terror on an unprecedented level in Gaza. Donald Trump has removed those sanctions as one of his first moves in his administration, and that basically gives the white flag of surrender, or like, I don't know, whatever the checkered flag at the start of the races is, to this religious nationalist settlement movement in the West Bank to basically wage war on Palestinians. And then you have a situation also in the northern West Bank, in Tulkarm, Jenin, and a few of the refugee camps in that area, where the Palestinian Authority has lost control. And they've lost control to an array of resistance forces, not just Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but just pretty much everyone who wants to take up the gun against the occupation. The guns are coming in through Jordan like never before. There are new smuggling networks that have opened up. They're also developing new IED munitions that have had a powerful effect on Israeli armor. And Israel's worried. They're worried they're gonna start actually being able to get develop like tandem anti-tank rocket systems and start to look like Hamas does in the Gaza Strip. And now they have laid siege to these cities, and they're waging a brutal operation that we haven't seen in Jenin since the second Intifada, but this time they're complementing it with air power. And the Gazification of the northern West Bank is underway.
God, what a nightmare. Yeah, this was the trade-off for getting rid of the last guy and replace him with the other last guy. It is a break from the Washington consensus on some things, but on this one, certainly for the very worst. I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't have time to ask you if you have a little bit better prognosis for the future of the situation in Eastern Europe now, but this has always been, I guess, the most obvious potential danger and fear of Donald Trump's foreign policy. It's not really realistic he'd go to war with Iran, but what else could he do for Benjamin Netanyahu? And makes sense that this would be it. But then, see, here's the problem, Max, obviously, right, is that if they really complete this annexation, including, for example, the cleansing of Eastern Jerusalem, then that almost certainly equates also then to the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the rebuilding of the temple and the onset of World War IV or V or whatever number we're on now in the Middle East, right?
That's where this is going. I mean, this is although the leading politician or political figure and operator of the temple movement, which aims for a kind of a messianic apocalypse with that begins with the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Itamar Ben-Gvir has left the government. This moment and the dynamics of the moment after the ceasefire really fuel his movement. And so we're moving away from, I think the war is becoming more internalized. Israeli society, Jewish Israeli society is a pressure cooker. We're seeing the removal of the chief of staff of the Israeli military. He will be replaced with a more fanatically religious nationalist figure, as well as the head of the Southern Command in Gaza. So the religious nationalists, the temple movement fanatics are going to work to complete their march through the institutions. And Israel's military will be focused on the West Bank, which always has a messianic quality to it because of the Jewish holy sites that are there, and the desire to just oust the Palestinian population from living anywhere near them.
And then, I'm sorry, in just a couple of moments here at the end, what about the future of the Gaza Strip now? I saw aid trucks are headed in there. I know there's a clip of Netanyahu saying, well, Donald Trump told me I can go right back to war as soon as the last hostages are released. But do you predict that that's the way things are going there, or they're going to have a chance to rebuild?
Well, I think the religious nationalist movement has lost or has stalled on its agenda in the Gaza Strip. What it wanted the annexation of the North, which they were getting. Their commanders were in charge of the operation that saw the starvation siege of northern Gaza, which culminated with the destruction of the Kamal Adwan Hospital, the last medical facility there. They took a lot of bodies. A lot of them died. A lot of them were injured, and they wanted something for their sacrifice. And so what they wanted was the ability to build new settlements in Gaza. They actually thought they were going to get this if the war continued. They're really upset with Donald Trump right now. They're upset with Netanyahu. As I mentioned, Ben-Gvir left the coalition. So they still have that on the agenda. What Netanyahu and the entire military intelligence apparatus wants is a permanent Israeli military presence in two areas in Gaza. One, the Netzarim corridor, which cuts off the north from the rest of Gaza, and then primarily the Philadelphia corridor between the Egyptian Sinai and southern and Rafah, because they believe that if they're there, it will prevent Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades and other resistance factions from being able to rearm. As we saw after the announcement of the ceasefire, Hamas was able to send members of its Nukba force, its most elite forces, into the streets to show, for a sort of show of force and survival, that there was no eradication of Hamas. Israel failed on its major goal of eliminating Hamas. And so they are desperate to prevent them from rearming. And I think that could lead to the breakdown of the ceasefire in phases 2 and 3, which call for a removal of Israeli forces from those areas. And we've heard from the Trump administration, NSC Director Mike Waltz, that they will allow Netanyahu to send the troops back in. So we will see. I mean, the other factor that I didn't mention is that Jewish Israeli society is exhausted, and the reservist forces rely on, men who are of just any male of fighting age, and they are economically exhausted, and they want to be with their families, and they want to go back to their businesses. And many of them are half crazy or completely crazy, just deeply traumatized from participating in the Gaza operation. So how long can Israel keep at this for?
And with that, we're all out of time. I'm sorry, but thank you so much for your time again on the show, Max. It's always great to talk to you.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
All right, you guys, that is the great Max Blumenthal. He is the editor-in-chief over there at thegrayzone.com, and he's got a whole crew of great journalists over there as well. His latest book is called The Management of Savagery.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.